Why does a city that once symbolized freedom, ambition, and endless possibility now feel like it punishes you the moment you arrive? Before you even see Times Square, before you take your first photo or step into the subway, New York has already started charging you in ways most visitors never expect and rarely understand until it is too late. For decades, New York sold itself as a dream destination. Movies, television, social media, and glossy travel campaigns promised energy, culture, opportunity, and a feeling that anything could happen here. But behind that image, a quieter transformation has been unfolding. A system built not just to welcome visitors, but to extract from them, layer by layer, fee by fee, moment by moment. And the most unsettling part is that none of it feels accidental. The modern tourist arrives believing the cost is already known. Flights paid, hotel booked, attractions planned. Yet almost immediately, reality begins to fracture that illusion. Fees appear where none were mentioned. Charges stack on top of charges, small amounts at first, almost invisible, designed not to shock, but to normalize. A few dollars here, a mandatory surcharge there. By the end of the day, the city feels less like a place you are visiting and more like a system you are trapped inside. This is not just about money. It is about psychology, about pressure, about the subtle stress of realizing that every basic action now carries a price tag. Want to move through the, city? There is a cost. Want to rest? Another cost. Want to simply exist as a visitor without anxiety? That may be the most expensive luxury of all. New York no longer just charges for experiences. It charges for access, convenience, and increasingly, for patience. What makes this shift so disturbing is how normalized it has become. These fees are rarely framed as problems. They are described as standard, mandatory, or just how things work here. Tourists accept them because they feel powerless to resist. Locals barely question them anymore because they have been living inside this structure for years. And institutions benefit precisely because no single charge feels outrageous on its own. The damage comes from accumulation. At the same time, the city continues to project the same glamorous image to the outside world. The lights still shine. The slogans still promise magic. But underneath, New York operates less like a destination and more like a toll system disguised as a city. A place where movement, comfort, and even basic clarity come at a premium. And for many visitors, this realization hits not with anger, but with exhaustion. This is why fewer people say they want to visit New York, even if they cannot fully explain why. The issue is not just high prices. It is the feeling of being constantly charged, monitored, and drained. The sense that the city no longer gives back what it takes. And once you notice this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it, because the fees are not random. They are symptoms of something deeper, structural, and quietly corrosive. As we move forward, we need to look closely at what these unavoidable charges really reveal about the city itself, and why New York has become the clearest example of a broader urban shift that most people are not ready to confront yet. If this feels uncomfortable, that reaction matters. Because understanding what is really happening in New York today is not just about tourism, it is about recognizing how modern cities quietly reshape behavior, expectations, and tolerance. These hidden fees are not random inconveniences. They are signals of a system that survives by normalizing pressure, confusion, and silent acceptance. That is why engaging with this conversation is important. When people comment, when they question, when they share similar experiences, the illusion starts to crack. If you have ever visited New York and felt this constant sense of being charged, rushed, or psychologically drained, write it in the comments. Even a simple phrase like "I felt it too" helps expose a reality that is usually dismissed or ignored. If this analysis is helping you see the city from a different angle, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that this kind of deeper, more honest discussion matters, and if you want to understand how these hidden systems operate, not only in New York but across other major cities, subscribing ensures you do not miss what comes next. This Channel exists to unpack what glossy headlines and tourist brochures never explain. The more people who understand the structure behind the experience, the harder it becomes to pretend this is normal or sustainable. What most visitors never realize is that the real shock of New York is not a single outrageous charge, but the slow discovery that almost nothing is free anymore. The city no longer confronts tourists with one clear price. Instead, it surrounds them with a web of unavoidable fees that feel small in isolation but overwhelming in combination. This is how resistance disappears. You do not protest a few dollars. You adapt. And that adaptation is exactly the point. The moment you land, the process begins. Transportation fees layered with surcharges. Airport systems designed to funnel you through paid conveniences. Even basic navigation inside the city carries friction unless you pay to remove it. The design subtly communicates one message. Time, clarity, and comfort are no longer included. They are upgrades, and if you do not pay, the city will make sure you feel the cost in other ways. Then come the accommodations. Hotels advertise one price, but the real bill tells a different story. Mandatory resort fees, facility fees, service fees, city occupancy taxes, energy surcharges. None of them optional. None of them clearly explained up front. By the time you notice, you are already committed. And this is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. Confusion reduces confrontation. Fatigue increases compliance. Every few hours, a new realization hits. A fee for storing luggage. A fee for using amenities you assumed were included. A fee for convenience that used to be standard. Each moment creates a small spike of irritation, but also resignation. You tell yourself it is just how New York works. That thought is powerful because it shuts down deeper questioning. Once something is framed as inevitable, it no longer feels political or structural. It feels personal. Around the third or fourth day, something shifts psychologically. Visitors stop calculating joy and start calculating damage control. Where can I avoid another charge? What can I skip? How much energy do I have left to navigate this city without paying for shortcuts? This constant mental math erodes the experience. The city becomes loud not just in sound, but in demands. Every interaction feels transactional. Every pause feels monetized. This is where the broader urban pattern becomes visible. New York is not just expensive, it is optimized for extraction. It monetizes stress, urgency, and disorientation. The more overwhelmed you feel, the more likely you are to pay to escape that feeling, even temporarily. And because this pressure is spread across countless small fees, no single actor feels responsible. The burden falls entirely on the visitor. What makes this especially unsettling is how invisible it remains in official narratives. Tourism campaigns still talk about excitement, culture, and opportunity. They do not talk about the emotional toll of constant microcharges. They do not talk about how quickly the city turns leisure into labor. But once you notice this pattern, you start to see it everywhere, not just in New York, but in airports, transit systems, and tourist hubs across the country. And that raises a deeper question. If visiting the city already feels like navigating a financial obstacle course, what does that say about living here full time? Because these fees did not appear overnight. They were tested, normalized, and expanded on residents first. Tourists are simply the latest layer in a system that has been quietly tightening for years. The most revealing part of these unavoidable fees is not how much they cost, but what they quietly expose about who New York is built for now. Tourists often feel targeted, but the truth is more unsettling. The same system extracting from visitors has been pushing residents out for years. What you experience for a few days, locals endure as a permanent condition. Gentrification is usually described as a housing issue, but that framing misses the full picture. It is not just rent that becomes unaffordable, it is daily life itself. Every added fee, every monetized convenience, every paid workaround raises the baseline cost of existing in the city. When tourists feel drained after a week, it mirrors what long-term residents feel after years of constant pressure. The difference is, that residents cannot leave at the end of their stay. Entire neighborhoods have been transformed without dramatic announcements or visible collapse. No explosions, no sudden evacuations, just a slow disappearance. Local stores replaced by chains that can absorb higher fees. Long-time tenants replaced by short-term renters or transient populations. Community spaces quietly shut down because they can no longer survive the layered costs imposed by the city. The neighborhood does not vanish. Its soul does. For visitors, this process shows up as emptiness where authenticity was promised. Streets that feel polished but hollow. Restaurants that look curated but lack history. Areas once described as vibrant now feel transactional and interchangeable. The city still markets diversity, but what remains is often a controlled version designed to maximize revenue, not human connection. This is where the illusion fully breaks. The fees tourists cannot escape are not just tourist fees. They are urban filters. They decide who can stay, who can linger, who can afford spontaneity, and who must constantly calculate risk. Over time, this reshapes the population itself. People who built the culture that made New York desirable are slowly priced out, replaced by those who can tolerate or absorb the pressure, at least temporarily. What makes this expulsion so effective is its silence. There is no official statement saying certain people are no longer welcome. The message is delivered through costs, through friction, through exhaustion. Eventually, people leave not because they want to, but because the city makes staying psychologically unsustainable. Tourists sense this tension instinctively. They may not name it, but they feel it in the atmosphere. And the city responds not by fixing the underlying strain, but by leaning further into tourism as a revenue patch. More visitors, more fees, more extraction. This creates a feedback loop. The more the city depends on short-term money, the less it invests in long-term livability. The less livable it becomes, the more it must extract from whoever is still willing to pass through. This is why New York increasingly feels like a place people endure rather than inhabit. A city optimized for movement, not roots, for spending, not belonging. And once you recognize this pattern, it becomes impossible to separate the tourist experience from the resident reality. They are two sides of the same system, moving at different speeds towards the same outcome. What truly unsettles visitors once they start paying attention is how deeply these fees are embedded into the city's physical systems. This is not just about hotels or attractions. It is about infrastructure itself becoming a toll gate. The subway, the streets, the utilities, even public spaces now feel less like shared foundations and more like exhausted mechanisms squeezing value from everyone who passes through. Take transportation. The subway is marketed as an iconic, democratic system, but the reality feels different. Fares rise while reliability erodes. Delays become normal. Stations feel neglected, yet enforcement feels constant. You pay more, wait longer, and receive less, all while being told this is the price of living in a global city. For tourists, this creates confusion. For residents, it creates resignation. The system no longer inspires trust, only tolerance. Then, there are the streets themselves. Congestion pricing, tolls, ride fees, parking, penalties. Every attempt to move through the city encounters friction designed to convert movement into revenue. This is framed as efficiency or sustainability, but the lived experience feels like attrition. You are not encouraged to explore. You are nudged to pay your way through stress. The city does not flow. It negotiates with you. About halfway through a visit, many tourists notice something harder to articulate. The city feels tired. Not culturally tired, but mechanically worn down. Elevators out of service, escalators permanently broken, aging terminals patched instead of rebuilt, airports that feel overwhelmed even on normal days. Yet every failure comes with an associated fee or workaround. Pay for priority. Pay to skip lines. Pay to reduce discomfort that should not exist at this scale. This is the first major narrative turn. The fees are not funding renewal. They are compensating for decay. New York is not charging because it is thriving. It is charging because its systems are strained, and the burden is being quietly transferred to individuals instead of addressed structurally. Visitors sense this contradiction immediately. How can a city this expensive feel so fragile? As the days pass, another realization sets in. These systems are no longer built for human rhythms. They are built for throughput. Airports prioritize volume over experience. Transit prioritizes crowd management over dignity. Public services prioritize compliance over care. The infrastructure treats people as units moving through pipelines, not as citizens or guests. This is why stress becomes ambient. You are constantly adapting to systems that do not adapt to you. And here is the deeper break. This infrastructural fatigue mirrors a social one. When systems stop working for people, people stop believing in the place. The fees tourists pay are not just financial. They pay with patience, emotional energy, and lowered expectations. Over time, this changes how the city is perceived globally. Not as a dream, but as a challenge. Not as an invitation, but as an obstacle. By the end of this stage, many visitors realize something unsettling. The city is no longer hiding its exhaustion. It is monetizing it. Every inconvenience becomes a paid escape hatch. Every failure becomes a premium option. And this model does not signal renewal. It signals a system buying time, one fee at a time, while avoiding deeper repair. If you have noticed these infrastructural pressures yourself or felt this constant friction while moving through New York, leave a comment with a word like strain or pressure. Those reactions help surface what usually stays invisible. At some point, the shock fades and something more dangerous takes its place: acceptance. This is where New York's system becomes most effective. The absurd stops feeling shocking and starts feeling routine. Long lines, broken systems, aggressive pricing, surprise fees, visible decay paired with premium charges. None of it triggers outrage anymore. It triggers adjustment. People lower expectations. They plan around dysfunction. They internalize the idea that discomfort is simply the price of being here. For tourists, this normalization happens faster than they realize. On the first day, the fees feel irritating. On the second, they feel inevitable. By the third, they feel almost invisible. You stop asking why things cost extra and start asking how to minimize damage. You accept that rest costs money, movement costs money, and peace of mind costs money. The city trains you to stop questioning and start coping. This psychological shift is not accidental. Cities do not collapse only through dramatic failure. They decay through repetition. When small injustices happen often enough, the brain stops flagging them as threats. The abnormal becomes familiar. The unacceptable becomes tolerated. This is how systems survive long past their breaking point, not by fixing themselves, but by recalibrating what people consider normal. Walk through crowded stations, delayed trains, overstressed terminals, and you will notice something chilling. Almost no one looks surprised anymore. Faces show fatigue, not anger. Resignation, not resistance. Even visitors begin to mirror this posture. They move faster, speak less, and mentally brace themselves before every interaction. The city's chaos becomes ambient, like background noise you stop hearing but never escape. Here is a critical narrative turn. The fees themselves matter less than what they represent. They signal a city that no longer feels obligated to offer a coherent experience. Instead, it offers fragments. Pay to skip this, pay to fix that, pay to avoid the worst outcomes. Responsibility shifts away from institutions and onto individuals. If you are stressed, it is because you did not upgrade. If you are uncomfortable, it is because you chose the cheaper option. This logic quietly reshapes behavior. People stop demanding better systems and start budgeting for dysfunction. That is when decline becomes self-sustaining. Once enough people accept friction as normal, there is no urgency to remove it. The city does not need to improve. It only needs to sell relief from its own failures. Tourists feel this most sharply because they arrive with expectations. Residents feel it more deeply because they no longer remember what alternatives feel like. And this is where the myth of New York truly fractures. A city once defined by possibility now conditions people to endure. The excitement is replaced by vigilance. The wonder is replaced by calculation. If this feels familiar, it is because this pattern does not stay contained. It spreads outward. Other cities watch, copy, and adapt the same model. Normalize inconvenience, monetize escape, silence descent through exhaustion. New York is not an outlier anymore. It is a prototype. Before we move on, share your experience. Did you feel this normalization while visiting or living in New York? Comment with a word like accepted it or got used to it. Those reactions reveal more than statistics ever could. Tourism in New York no longer functions as discovery. It functions as anesthesia. For a brief moment, it distracts from the deeper structural strain, both for the city and for the people moving through it. Bright lights, iconic landmarks, curated experiences, all designed to keep attention focused outward while pressure builds underneath. The visitor becomes part of a performance where discomfort is masked by spectacle and stress is reframed as excitement. This is where the system reveals another layer. Tourism is not just revenue. It is narrative control. As long as visitors are busy chasing landmarks, cues, and photos, the city avoids confronting the question of livability. The message is subtle but consistent. This place is not meant to be inhabited calmly. It is meant to be consumed quickly. The faster you move, the less you ask. The less you ask, the smoother the extraction. Halfway through a visit, many tourists sense a contradiction they struggle to explain. They are seeing everything, yet feeling nothing settle. The city feels loud but hollow, intense but distant. You are everywhere and nowhere at the same time. This emotional dissonance is not accidental. A city optimized for throughput does not want you lingering long enough to notice what is missing. Another turn happens when you realize how carefully your movement is guided. Tourist zones are polished, controlled, and insulated. Step slightly outside them and the tone shifts. Infrastructure weakens. Services thin out. Fees become more aggressive, but support becomes scarcer. The illusion breaks, and many retreat back to the curated core, not because it feels better, but because it feels safer and more legible. This is how tourism becomes a buffer for decline. It concentrates attention on surfaces while deeper systems erode. It creates the impression of vitality, without requiring sustainability, and it trains visitors to confuse stimulation with quality of life. You leave feeling exhausted but convinced that exhaustion was part of the New York experience. Here is the unsettling insight. Tourism no longer feeds the city. It props it up. It delays reckoning. Instead of fixing structural problems, the city expands its audience. More visitors mean more fees, more short-term cash, and less urgency to rebuild for residents. The result is a place that looks alive while functioning in survival mode. This model reshapes perception globally. People stop asking whether New York is livable and start asking whether it is worth enduring for a few days. That shift matters. When a city becomes something you tolerate briefly instead of something you imagine building a life in, the myth is already collapsing. And once tourism serves as anesthesia, the city risks overdosing on its own image. Because distraction works only until reality becomes impossible to ignore. When airports break down, when transit collapses, when costs overwhelm even short visits, the spectacle can no longer hide the strain. Airports are often described as gateways, but in New York they feel more like confession booths for a city under strain. Before you even reach Manhattan, the message is delivered with brutal clarity. Long lines that barely move. Terminals stretched beyond their original design. Constant announcements apologizing for delays that everyone already expects. And threaded through all of it, the same pattern of fees, surcharges, and paid escapes that define the city itself. For many visitors, this is the first emotional crack. Airports are supposed to be transitional spaces, efficient and neutral. Instead, New York's airports feel heavy, tense, and strangely hostile. You pay to move faster. You pay to sit more comfortably. You pay to reduce noise, stress, and uncertainty. The environment quietly communicates that ease is no longer a baseline. It is a product. About a third of the way through this experience, a realization hits. These airports are not failing suddenly. They are aging visibly, patched repeatedly, expanded without coherence. Systems layered on top of systems. Temporary fixes treated as permanent solutions. Yet instead of deep reinvestment, the model leans on monetization, premium lines, priority access, paid lounges. The worse the baseline experience becomes, the more valuable the upgrades feel. This is a turning point. Airports are mirrors of national capacity. When they feel chaotic, overwhelmed, and transactional, it reflects more than poor planning. It reveals how infrastructure is managed under long-term pressure. New York's airports operate like pressure valves, releasing stress onto travelers instead of absorbing it. The city does not shield you from strain. It hands it to you and charges you to manage it yourself. Then comes another shift. You notice how normalized the dysfunction is. Staff are calm, almost resigned. Passengers complain quietly, rarely expecting solutions. Everyone seems trained to endure. The system functions not because it works well, but because people have adjusted their expectations downward. This is not collapse in the dramatic sense. It is erosion, slow, quiet, and deeply normalized. As you move from the airport into the city, the pattern repeats. Transportation hubs feel overloaded. Information feels fragmented. Clarity feels expensive. Every system assumes friction as a given. And friction is where monetization thrives. The more confusing the environment, the more valuable shortcuts become. This is not accidental design. It is adaptive design under decline. Here is the deeper implication. When airports, the most visible portals of a city, feel like endurance tests, perception shifts globally. Visitors arrive already tired, already cautious, already aware that this place demands effort before offering anything back. The gateway sets the tone, and, increasingly, that tone is one of fatigue rather than excitement. This is why airports matter in this story. They are not side details. They are early warning systems. They reveal how a city treats flow, pressure, and people at scale. New York's airports do not suggest a city preparing for the future. They suggest a city managing overload by selling relief, one upgrade at a time. What many visitors cannot name, but instinctively feel, is that parts of New York are vanishing without drama. Not abandoned, not destroyed. Simply fading out. Streets that once felt alive now feel quieter, thinner, less anchored. Stores close earlier. Windows stay dark longer. Familiar names disappear and are replaced by temporary concepts, pop-ups, or nothing at all. This is disappearance without ruins, and it is far more unsettling than visible collapse. This is the next narrative turn. Cities usually die loudly, through crisis or catastrophe. New York is doing something different. It is hollowing out. Communities do not leave in mass exodus, they leak away. One family at a time, one business at a time, one cultural space at a time. Each departure feels isolated, almost personal, but together they form a pattern that tourists sense even if they cannot articulate it. Walk through neighborhoods once marketed as authentic and vibrant, and you notice a strange sameness. The same chains, the same pricing, the same polished surfaces. What is missing is texture, the feeling that people live here rather than pass through. This is not decay you photograph, it is absence you feel. And absence does not trigger alarm, it triggers confusion. For visitors, this creates emotional dissonance. The city is crowded, yet something feels empty. Busy, yet detached. You are surrounded by people, but not by community. The places where daily life used to unfold have been replaced by optimized spaces designed to monetize short stays. This is how neighborhoods disappear without being labeled as lost. Here is the deeper insight. These vanishing areas are not failures, they are outcomes. When fees rise, when friction increases, when survival becomes exhausting, the first thing to leave is non-essential life. Local rituals, informal gathering, slow interaction. What remains is functional activity, work, transit, consumption. Everything else becomes a liability. This is why tourists often report a strange sadness they cannot explain. They came expecting energy and found efficiency. They expected character and found branding. The city still functions, but it no longer breathes the way it once did. And breathing is not something you can charge for, so it is slowly engineered out. Once you notice this, you start seeing it everywhere. Entire blocks that feel paused. Bodegas replaced by digital storefronts or empty glass. Cultural spaces surviving only as memories shared online. The city does not announce these losses. It absorbs them quietly, because quiet loss does not disrupt cash flow. And this is what makes the disappearance so dangerous. When decline is invisible, it goes unchallenged. When communities evaporate without spectacle, no one organizes to save them. They simply become part of the background. Another adjustment. Another thing people get used to. What keeps this entire system intact is not ignorance, but denial. New York does not collapse because people do not see what is happening. It endures because no one officially admits it. Institutions, media, and cultural narratives work together to preserve the image of inevitability and success, even as lived reality contradicts it every day. The city does not lie loudly. It stays silent strategically. This is where the illusion becomes most fragile. When a city refuses to name its own decline, it forces everyone else to participate in the performance. Tourists feel pressure to say the trip was worth it. Residents feel pressure to justify why they stay. Businesses feel pressure to pretend the model still works. Admitting failure would mean questioning the entire structure that depends on constant belief. Midway through this realization, another uncomfortable truth emerges. Complaints are reframed as personal weakness. If you are overwhelmed, you are told you are not built for city life. If you cannot afford it, you are told to work harder. If the experience feels hostile, you are told that intensity is part of the charm. This narrative shifts responsibility away from systems and onto individuals, protecting the myth at all costs. Media coverage plays a critical role here. Stories focus on isolated incidents, temporary setbacks, or superficial improvements. A renovated terminal, a new development, a flashy event. These fragments create the illusion of momentum while masking structural fatigue. What never makes headlines is the cumulative psychological toll, the quiet exits, the erosion of trust between people and place. For tourists, this denial manifests as cognitive dissonance. You sense something is wrong, but everything around you insists that nothing is. The city continues to brand itself as unstoppable, iconic, essential. Questioning that narrative feels almost taboo, and so visitors often leave confused rather than angry, drained rather than outraged. This is the most dangerous stage of decline, not collapse but insistence. When systems demand belief instead of earning it. When cities survive on reputation rather than experience. When the gap between image and reality grows so wide that maintaining the illusion requires constant silence. The normalization of this gap reshapes culture itself. People stop expecting coherence. They accept contradiction as normal. A city that is both rich and broken, both celebrated and exhausting, both admired and avoided. This emotional split is not sustainable, but it can last longer than anyone expects because it feeds on habit. New York has reached a point where acknowledging decline would require confronting decades of decisions, incentives, and trade-offs. So the easier option is to deny, deflect, and delay. To keep the story alive even as fewer people fully believe it. And that is why the city feels suspended, neither collapsing nor recovering, just drifting forward on momentum alone. By the time visitors reach this point in their experience, something fundamental has shifted. New York no longer feels like an exception. It feels like a preview. The city stops being a singular case of excess and starts looking like a blueprint for where modern urban life is heading if nothing changes. What once felt shocking now feels predictive. This is the final and most unsettling turn. The fees tourists cannot escape are not just about New York. They are signals of a broader urban model under stress. A model where cities compensate for structural weakness by monetizing friction, where decline does not arrive as catastrophe, but as a steady tightening of everyday life, where the cost of existing quietly rises until only those who can endure constant pressure remain. New York's transformation matters because it has always been the cultural amplifier. Trends tested here spread outward. What becomes normal in New York eventually appears elsewhere, often stripped of context and adopted as necessity. Hidden fees, paid convenience, degraded infrastructure paired with premium upgrades, normalized exhaustion. These are no longer local anomalies, they are exportable practices. About halfway through this realization, a deeper fear sets in. If even a short visit feels unsustainable, what does that say about long-term urban futures? Cities were once places of possibility, collaboration, and shared systems. Now they increasingly resemble environments where individuals are left to manage systemic failure alone as long as they can afford the coping mechanisms. This is where the myth of the American urban dream finally collapses. Not because cities fail outright, but because they stop offering a coherent promise. Success becomes synonymous with tolerance. Survival replaces aspiration. The city no longer asks what it can provide, it asks how much pressure you can absorb before leaving. And here is the most important insight. Decline does not announce itself. It normalizes itself. By the time most people realize something is wrong, they have already adjusted their expectations downward. They no longer ask for better systems. They ask for better workarounds. That is, when reversal becomes hardest. New York stands at this threshold. Not ruined, but strained. Not dead, but hollowed. Still attracting millions, but inspiring fewer. Still charging relentlessly, but giving less in return. It is not a warning about one city. It is a warning about the direction of urban life itself. If you stayed until this point, it means you felt that something here connects to more than just New York. And that matters. Because understanding this pattern is the first step to seeing modern cities clearly, without marketing, without illusion, without excuses. If this analysis helped you see what usually stays hidden, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This is where we keep exposing the realities behind the urban myths most people still believe. Leave a like if you believe cities should work for people, not extract from them. And if you reach the end, comment the phrase, "The illusion is breaking." So I know you were here, paying attention. Your comment helps this conversation reach others who are still questioning why city life feels harder than it should. Now, watch the next video appearing on your screen. It continues this story and reveals another side of urban decline that most channels refuse to talk about.